Look, Netflix is not the only organization who has suffered a bit of a script leak of late, because embarrassingly enough, my script for the subscribe joke for this video was also leaked on the internet. I mean, it was leaked by me, to be fair, but that's still technically a leak, right? I mean, if you put a hole in your own pipe, then you still have a leak, so yeah, spoiler warning. But the basic gist of it is that you should subscribe to the Grand Line Review for regular One Piece content uploaded straight into your YouTube feed. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and today we have a strange video for this channel that has to do with the live-action Netflix adaptation of One Piece, because, allegedly, the script for the first episode has been leaked online. Now, I do need to say the very super standard stuff like be very wary about the legitimacy of stuff like this. I mean, there's a whole subculture of internet focused on making fake leaks, but what I will say is that if this was generated by a fan, then it's a pretty damn fine job. At the same time, there's also precedent for production officers to be leaking their own scripts as marketing stunts to generate some sort of hype, which you know almost certainly happened with Star Wars Episode 9, when an actor allegedly just left their script under the bed in a hotel, which, yeah, look, that's not a thing that happens. So this could very easily be the real deal, and while I am not going to distribute or show said script, I am going to be going through the scenes here today and just giving my general thoughts and impressions. So I guess you could consider this maybe a potential spoiler warning if you're not keen on risking spoilers for the live action project, but for everyone else there are some super interesting decisions that you will not see coming that were made for this first episode. And quite honestly, it gives me a lot of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could seriously pull this off. Let's begin though, and the first scene does replicate the series in that it is Roger's execution in Logtown. However, we've already got a ton of interesting stuff to go through, because guess who the very first named character in the script is? And if you said Roger, you are wrong. If you said Luffy, you're also wrong. And if you said Shanks, then you are very wrong. The first named character to appear is indeed Smoker, a young smoker who is making his way through the crowd to see Roger, kind of like that anime filler scene during the Logtown arc, which I really like actually. I love the idea that from the get-go, we are taking every morsel of an opportunity to build this world and its characters, which continues pretty fast and furiously, because this scene also has an appearance by then Fleet Admiral Kong, as well as Admiral Sengoku, and they have a brief discussion about Garp and Roger. And actually, Kong gives this whole speech on the execution platform, which sounds pretty epic, and then a man in the crowd does his thing by asking where Roger left his treasure, and then Roger says his last immortal words, but they are cut off right at the end by Kong ordering his execution. And then the scene ends with a brief voiceover by Shanks describing the beginning of the Great Age of Piracy, although he doesn't refer to it as such. Not yet anyway. And then we cut to Fuchsia Village, or Windmill Village in the script, where Shanks is telling the story to a young Monkey D. Luffy in Makino's bar. And here things play out more or less similarly to manga and anime events. There's some shenanigans with the Red Hair Pirates. We're briefly introduced to all of their major members, being Lucky Roo, Yasopp, and Ben Beckman. And then Luffy eventually discovers a devil fruit in some sneaky circumstances. Higuma enters, makes a big fuss, and once again this is all very according to source material here, and Luffy becomes somewhat disillusioned with Shanks after the altercation, and then they discover that Luffy is now a rubber boy after eating the devil fruit during the Higuma situation. The description of the stretching powers are quite simple. It literally says Shanks lets go of Luffy's arm and snap, which is the exact effect I'm looking for. Making Luffy's devil fruit abilities look, feel, and sound good is going to be paramount to this adaptation, and snap is a pretty perfect word to describe my ideal effect here, because when Luffy stretches it needs to feel fast and powerful, and in live action that is going to be difficult to achieve, but it sounds like they're going to give it a solid go. So as one would expect, they also refer to it as the Gum Gum fruit, so it looks like we'll be using the English translation for all devil fruits in the series, which, yeah, was expected, but then again there was always the chance of using the Japanese names to make things a bit more like a world of its own. Also, I forgot to mention this actually, but the script does make a point of saying that all names are handled in the Japanese methodology, so we go last name, then first name. So it's not like Roger Gold or Luffy D. Monkey, for example, so we're very thankfully sticking to the Japanese standard there. And very notably, they skip the scene where Luffy stabs himself under the eye and gets his trademark scar. He just appears with a bandage under his eye, and in the next scene you see the scar. And once again, that's also not unexpected. I don't know if there's any situation in Western culture where it would be easy to get away with showing a child stabbing themselves. I mean, even in the original Toei anime, they cut that out, although they did put it into the episode of Luffy special. I don't think it's a huge deal, though. I've never been too bothered by the anime leaving that out. I mean, yes, I prefer it because it's our first indicator of Luffy's sheer determination, but it is what it is. It's not series breaking. Next up, we are cutting to Makino's bar a couple of weeks later, and Garp gets mentioned again, but not by name. Whoopslap just says something along the lines of having promised Luffy's grandfather that he would watch over the boy, and also he's reading the World Economic Times, which is specifically mentioned in the script rather than just a plain old newspaper. And in fact, in the original, I don't think that Whoopslap was even reading a newspaper, so this was another nice touch of world building. Anyway, Higuma then does what Higuma does and interrupts this peaceful situation to be a dick, which results in a surprisingly brutal situation where Luffy is beaten up and even Makino gets a backhand to the face. And I'm kind of surprised that they've chosen to show Higuma beating Luffy so voraciously, I'll say, even though, yeah, it was obviously in the original, but there is a big difference in seeing a cartoon being beaten versus a real-life child, particularly in the Western realm. So I feel like One Piece is probably going to seem maybe a shade darker in this incarnation, and there's other evidence to support that further on. So then Shanks arrives and we get another piece of brutality with Lucky Roux shooting a very unfortunate bandit in the head, which once again is going to look far more violent in real life than on page, but the rest goes as we know and Higuma escapes with Luffy. And out pops the Lord of the Coast, and I am so glad to see him in the script because making a giant eel-like creature for live-action television is no easy task. It's expensive and usually of questionable quality because let's be real, even Game of Thrones had its moments of really poor CGI realization, and that series was like the epitome of having money to spend. Still, things happen more or less as we remember. Shanks saves Luffy, and in the script it refers to Shanks staring down the Lord of the Coast with, quote, some sort of power. So yeah, they obviously aren't looking far enough into the future to blatantly call it Haki in the script, which is fine. At this point, it's just supposed to be a mysterious force anyway. This scene ends very intriguingly though. Obviously, we do the wide shot of Shanks' missing arm, but then Shanks has a voiceover segment saying stuff like, I'm sorry, Luffy, I couldn't protect you from the cruelty of the sea forever, but I wanted to shield you from it for as long as possible. Which is, yeah, I'm not a fan of that at all. Reading it just sounds kind of cringe, and I don't know why it's necessary. Like, I understand that Shanks is seemingly being set up as a voiceover narrator type of character, which happened in the execution scene, and actually, you know what, with that in mind, they may actually be planning to make Shanks the overall series narrator, which, yeah, I hadn't considered. I mean, I guess the narration does need a voice, and a familiar character is probably better than some unknown voice, but this particular situation just doesn't sit quite right with me. Anyway, this continues with Shanks voicing profound things about protecting stuff, and you see him carry Luffy into the bar where Shanks delivers him to Makino, and then we cut 10 years forward in time, which is now referred to as the present day, which is indeed interesting because as we all know, this scene is not over. Shanks still needs to leave the village and his hat to Luffy, but we have something quite unexpected now, very, very unexpected. Because in the present day, we find ourselves on a mountaintop shrine, and we are visually introduced to one Roronoa Zoro, who is approached by a member of Baroque Works. And I really like this because it's something that we know that happened, and it does feel like a great thing to introduce here, especially to build up the Baroque Works organization from the very inception of the series, which will most certainly lead to a nice payoff during an eventual Alabasta. But this agent is Mr. Seven, who is very notably not the same Mr. Seven who appeared on Alabasta. This was the original Mr. Seven who was killed trying to recruit Zoro, and this is the only picture that Oda has ever drawn of him. And his description in the script is quite similar, sort of. Mr. Seven is described as a tall man with a long black coat and a mohawk of red spikes, so look, it's actually a fairly faithful representation, on paper at least. But Mr. Seven then invites Zoro to join Baroque Works, and then a fight starts in which a silhouette of Mr. Seven being sliced in half, with the top half of his body sliding clean off, further adding fuel to the idea that although this is a silhouette, One Piece might be just that little bit darker than we're used to. And I guess I'm kind of conflicted on this scene overall though, because I really love how Zoro is introduced in the series tied up on the cross, but at the same time, in terms of instantly hooking people on a character, this is a decent introduction for Zoro. It is a big change though, and one that we'll see some ripple effects of later on. But first of all, we now move to a trading vessel which has been attacked, and we meet Alvida, who is described as being a woman of immense stature, tall and wide and oozing power. And this is an interesting description because one of the big questions with Netflix is how they are going to handle larger characters, because in the One Piece world, even restricting our knowledge to basic humans, we have people of all shapes and sizes, and my worst fear is that Alvida and characters like Alvida are just going to be bulky, forgettable people. At the very least, so it looks like they're trying to replicate Alvida's size in the script, although how they plan to realize that is a completely different question. Next up though, we have a scene at Alvida's base on Goat Island, which is not to be confused with the brief filler arc that also took place at a location known as Goat Island. It's a weird One Piece thing, let's not worry about it. But the most interesting thing about this scene though is that Don Krieg's name is mentioned. Quite specifically, Alvida and Hippoko discuss a tribute to Don Krieg, which annoys Alvida, but it looks like they are setting Krieg up to be a proper presence in this incarnation, rather than just some guy who shows up at Baratie, and I do really like this sort of stuff. I think it's a nice thing to layer in names here and there of characters that we eventually meet, but for now we are also introduced to Koby, and very importantly, we have the ever iconic Luffy popping out of a barrel moment, which I love that they are trying to keep in. What I don't like though is that there is a strong hint of 4Kids in the air about this scene, because Luffy doesn't hilariously berate Koby like in the anime and the manga. Instead, he just joyfully takes to Koby and plays along saying stuff like, nice to meet ya, and it feels a bit Anyway, Alvida makes a fuss and both of them move to escape, much like we know. But then we cut to a marketplace in Shellstown, with Marines doing a bit of a chit chat, and they name drop a couple of familiar figures who are apparently causing trouble, and once again Don Krieg comes up, but afterwards they they also name drop Arlong. And Captain Kuro is mentioned as well in regards to Morgan, their superior officer, so a lot of names floating around here by some miscellaneous Marines, which once again, I love. And then Zoro stumbles along, apparently literally carrying the body of Mr. Seven in a bag because he's trying to cash in a reward as a bounty hunter, which is pretty grim stuff actually. In the script, they even unzip the bag and we see the Marines' reactions, and it's not pretty. Then we cut back to Goat Island. Luffy and Koby reveal their dreams, much like we know, and Alvida finds them. An altercation begins and Luffy wins, very similarly to how things happened in the manga, I guess less so in the anime. And after that action scene, we are back in Shellstown, a tavern in Shellstown to be precise, and we actually see the whole Helmeppo situation play out in real time rather than a flashback, and it ends in Zoro accepting Helmeppo's conditions. Although something I do love is that the description of Helmeppo literally refers to him as an overcompensating douchebag, which, you know, accurate, I guess. The key takeaway here though is I think that Zoro is being portrayed as a much more vicious presence. In the script, he throws a mug at Helmeppo's head, slices down 2 of his Marines, and then directly threatens Helmeppo, the latter of which, yes, he did do in the anime events. The manga is much more vague about what actually happened, but there is this overwhelming vibe at play here that Zoro is not a person to be trifled with. Like, I can imagine him being quite a terrifying presence. And there's also no dog in this scene. You might remember in the anime and the manga that Helmeppo had a wild dog going crazy in the tavern, but in this scene he's just being a prick, walking in and kicking a couple off their table. Then there's a short scene with Luffy and Koby sailing, and Luffy is a very, let's say, encouraging person here, because he actually says that he wants to see Koby walk into a Marine office and enlist. Like, he's pretty directly pushing Koby to realize his dream, which I'm kind of conflicted about, because Luffy is coming off as a very righteous individual overall in the script. A very almost entirely pure existence, as opposed to what I loved about him in early One Piece, in that he was actually quite selfish, and would always end up doing the right thing, but more as a side note. And this scene also has by far my least favorite line of dialogue, because Koby asks Luffy if a Marine and a pirate can be friends, and apparently Luffy says, "I don't care who you are, as long as who you are is a good guy." Which, no, I'm not on board with that at all. It's a very 4Kids thing to say, and I think it's really out of character for Luffy. I feel like his answer would have been something much less cringy, more simple, and not as ham-fistedly profound. Like, I don't know, something like maybe, yeah, sure, why not, stupid face. That's obviously not what it would be, but I think it's closer. And then they talk about Zoro for a bit, and there's some more bad Luffy dialogue here. I won't go into it because But this leads us into a transition into a flashback of Shanks leaving Dawn Island. And there's actually something interesting here regarding Makino. In the script it says that she giggles, and if it wasn't clear that she was smitten with Shanks, it certainly is now. So they're definitely playing up that relationship far more than the manga or anime ever did. Also, there is a big change here, because in saying goodbye to Luffy, Shanks actually invites Luffy to join his crew and go out to sea with them. And at first I wasn't sure about this, but I actually kind of like it, having thought about it a bit more, because Luffy simply says no, and then he claims that he will become a captain of his own and even become the Pirate King, which does give Luffy a nice sense of determination. The fact that he so easily could have become a pirate right here and now, but he has his sights set on bigger goals. And then Shanks gives him the straw hat in that ever iconic moment, and we skip forward in time once again to Luffy leaving Dawn Island, punching the Lord of the Coast right in his face thing, and once again proudly declaring that he will become the king of the pirates. Fairly standard, much as we know. And then the very final scene of this episode takes place in Shellstown, with Zoro on the crucifix saying "not today" over and over and over. And then smash cut to a One Piece title card, and that is the end of episode 1. And look, I don't actually think it's too bad. There are a lot of pieces of dialogue that do seem kind of cringy, and I'm not a massive fan of the direction that they're taking Luffy in, but otherwise this is actually far better than anything that I was anticipating. I do quite enjoy how they are incorporating much grander and detailed elements of the world into the series at this early of a stage, and if this adaptation is a success, then that will only serve to reinforce later episodes, and in fact entire later seasons. And even with some of the cringy dialogue, you do have to remember that an actor could very well perform it far better than we could read it, or at the very least I could read it. You know, the words aren't everything, and there's a huge mountain of layers to be plonked on top of this script if indeed it is real, but at the moment, look, this is fine. I would be quite happy to see this as the first episode of live action One Piece, so in the case that it is real, this is the first hurdle cleared. There's an awful lot more though from every other area, like direction, production design, cinematography, acting, editing, special effects, and many more, but hey, I cannot complain with a solid foundation to build all of those things on top of. But what do you guys think? Please do leave your thoughts in the comments below, or even join my Discord server. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, then please do go and check out some of my other content, or even subscribe to the channel for more glorious One Piece business uploaded straight into your YouTube feeds. But for now, this has been the Grand Line Review, and I'll see you next time.